Normally, when I make a video like this, I'm out and about walking through random Dutch neighborhoods, showcasing a lot of the scenery to further illustrate some of the points that I make in these kinds of videos. But for the sake of this video, this right here is the scenery, because in this video, I want to talk about some of the biggest differences that I've observed between Dutch homes and American homes. That said, the first thing that I see in Dutch homes that I never saw back home in the US is separate toilets and bathrooms. Now, if you're an American watching this, you might be wondering, what do you mean separate toilets and bathrooms? The bathroom includes the toilet. No, they don't, at least not here in the Netherlands. As a matter of fact, upon arriving to my girlfriend's family's house, when I first got here to the Netherlands, one of the biggest things that surprised me was the fact that the toilet and the shower were not only in separate rooms, but they were on separate floors. The toilet, or the wc as Dutch people like to call it, which I believe stands for water closet, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but the wc was on the first floor and the shower was on the second floor. And I thought this was the wildest thing ever. Now, it does make a lot of sense if you're in a situation where there's only one toilet, because I can imagine that it would be very, very aggravating if you had to wait for somebody to finish showering in order for you to use the toilet, especially in the morning when a lot of people are getting ready at the same time. So I do see this as a positive, as a plus in that particular context. And in the two Dutch homes that I have been in, that has been the case, which, just as a side note, is something that I never really saw back home. Back home, pretty much any house that was built after maybe 2000 is going to have multiple toilets in the house. Even if it only has one bedroom, there's almost always going to be more than one toilet. But here, it seems like that's not as often the case. And of course, more toilets is nice. That's a nice feature to have, but it also means more cleaning. So I just find it interesting that the shower and the toilet are in completely different rooms. And generally speaking, it also depends on the house that you're in, but the wc, the toilet room, will have a sink in it as well. A very small sink, and the wc room overall is typically very small. It's almost like a closet, but with a toilet inside of the closet. But in the apartment that we're staying in for the next month, that is not the case. We don't have a sink within the wc room, and it's a mild inconvenience, but it's something that we're willing to overlook in order to have our own space. But that's definitely something that I have found to be very, very shocking. Now, on the topic of bathrooms, the next thing that I see in Dutch homes that I never really saw back in the US is adjustable shower heads. Adjustable shower heads. Now, in some older homes in the US, you will see shower heads that you can remove, but I don't think I've ever seen a shower head that you could actually adjust and move it up and down according to your preferences for the height of the shower head. Back home, growing up in the house that I grew up in, the shower head was basically embedded within the wall. And now that I've experienced this, I'm not gonna lie, I do believe that this is a lot better. For one, because it allows you to clean yourself more thoroughly. Two, because if you're cleaning the shower or the tub, it makes it a lot easier to clean that because you can literally remove the shower head and just spray where you need to spray. But also because when you are a different height than the other people who are going to be using the same shower as you, it can be very convenient to be able to move it. For example, my girlfriend, if you see her in the background, is basically a midget. She's basically a midget, a dwarf, whatever you want to call her. She is very, very short. And so she likes to have the shower head at basically mouth level for me. And of course, for me, that wouldn't work. That wouldn't be very convenient. So being able to move the shower head up whenever I take a shower is very, very nice. And also just another little side note, but I have noticed that here in the Netherlands, bathtubs seem to be much less common, whereas back home, especially in the non-master bathrooms, you're pretty much always going to have a shower and a tub in one, which, looking back on it, in my opinion, is kind of gross. And Once I got a little older, I realized that and I kind of stopped using the tub. But I digress. It's just another little difference that I've noticed. But the adjustable shower heads are definitely a major pro in my personal opinion. Now, the next thing that I have observed in Dutch homes that I never really saw back home is closets. And what do I mean by that? How do American homes not have closets? How do American bedrooms not have closets? Well, it's not that American bedrooms don't have closets. As a matter of fact, they do, but the difference is the closets back home tend to be embedded within the floor plan. So, in other words, you're almost always going to have a built-in closet with its own door, whereas here in the Netherlands, from what I've seen at least, you never really have that. Maybe in bigger houses you have that, but back home I would say that it's standard to have a built-in closet, whereas here you get an extra piece of furniture that carries all of your clothes. And typically that extra piece of furniture is a lot smaller, so it can't really carry as many clothes. Back home in some houses, for example, my apartment that I had back in 2022, you actually have a walk-in closet. So you have a big walk-in closet that's actually bigger than what your average WC would look like here. So you have plenty of space to put all of your clothes. My parents have one as well for themselves in their bedroom. In my childhood bedroom, I did not have a walk-in closet. I had a very small closet, but it was still a closet that had a door and was built into the floor plan. Here, that just doesn't seem to be the case. It doesn't really matter. It's not that big of a difference, but I do feel like having to put an extra piece of furniture can sort of cut into the square footage of your room and make it appear smaller than it actually is. But it's a very minor inconvenience. We're talking about first world problems here, personified. Now, the next thing that I have observed about Dutch homes that I never really saw back home, at least in the same price point, is large windows. So you can see right here in the background, hopefully it's not too dark, but you can see we have a floor to ceiling window in this Airbnb. And while not every place will have floor to ceiling windows, I have noticed that Dutch homes by and large tend to have very large windows. Almost invariably. I've never seen a Dutch home that didn't have at least one big window in it. And I think a big part of the reason why this is simply because there isn't that much natural light here. Obviously, it's nighttime right now, but even during the daytime, a lot of times it's cloudy and or raining. So you have to maximize the natural light that you do have access to. And I think that the size of the windows is also amplified by the fact that these windows typically have very little, if any, tint. So when you're going by people's houses, you can literally see straight through their house all the way to the backyard sometimes. And I talked about this in a video a while back, and people in the comments got on me saying that it was rude to look in people's houses. I heard this from Dutch people that it's normal. I have heard from Dutch people, straight from the source, straight from the horse's mouth, that it is normal to do this. So maybe there's some sort of cultural divide within the Netherlands regarding that issue. Maybe it's a generational thing. I don't know. What I am saying is that the times where I have, by chance, looked in people's houses, not to say that I'm just looking in their windows, stalking them, but if I was riding my bike past their house and I just so happened to look to my side and I looked in their house, I could see straight through. I could see exactly what they're watching on TV. I could see exactly what they're cooking for dinner. I could see literally everything about their life through their window because the windows are big and they're very clear. And it's something that I myself like. I like big windows. As a matter of fact, this big window right here is almost solely the reason why we are here in this Airbnb right now. Because once I saw this window, I knew that this place right here had our name on it. That's not to say that I spent $1,300 just because of a window, but I spent $1,300 just because of a window. And I like large windows, and back home, we just don't really see that. The only time you see windows like this back home are in more affluent neighborhoods. So basically, you have to be rich and have a really nice apartment or really nice condo or house in order to have windows like this, the floor to ceiling windows. Back home, you can expect to probably pay mid to high six figures for a house with windows like this. Whereas here, I mean, obviously the housing market is very, very expensive in its own right. But again, this is just the standard, not the exception. And it's definitely something that I enjoy quite a bit. Now, staying on the topic of windows, the next thing that I've observed about Dutch homes that I never really saw in American homes is the windows move differently. Now, what does this mean? Well, basically, from what I've seen, here in the Netherlands, a lot of times, especially in bedrooms, you can open the window in two different ways. So you can either open it outwards, so you can push the window out, or you can only open the top half or the bottom half of the window. So basically the window is tilted. I don't know exactly what you would call that. I'm sure there's a term for it. I just don't know what it is because growing up, we didn't have that. Back home in Texas, the only way you could open your windows was up and down. That was it. I never saw windows that opened outwards. I definitely never saw windows that tilted either from the top or from the bottom. But here, that is the norm. I've never seen a house without that. And a lot of people here, even in the dead of winter, when it's freezing cold outside, a lot of people like to take advantage of that feature. And I guess it helps ventilate the house. I don't know. But it's definitely a major, major difference in terms of the Dutch homes and Dutch windows in particular. Now, speaking of ventilation, the next thing that I see in Dutch homes that I never saw back home is heating vents. Now, what do I mean by that? Sure, back home in the US, even in Texas, we do have heaters. A lot of people don't know this, but Texas actually gets colder than the Netherlands. It just doesn't stay as cold for as long, but it does drop into that -10, -15 degrees Celsius range for probably a couple of weeks a year. But here, it does tend to stay cold for longer, so heating is a necessity. And what I've noticed is that here, the heaters tend to be these standalone vents that I don't even know how to really describe. They're just very, very different than what we saw back home. Back home, the heaters and the air conditioning always came from either the ceiling or the wall. So you would see sort of a vent in the ceiling or the wall, and that's where the air came from. And I don't really know which one is better in terms of the effectiveness, but what I do know is that these ones definitely take up a whole lot more space. I would have to imagine, theoretically, that these ones would be more effective simply because they're bigger, but I could be wrong about that. What I do know with 100% certainty is that I've never seen this back home. Sometimes back home, maybe in places like New York or just more urban environments, especially older urban environments, you might see that big AC unit hanging outside of the window. That's not what I'm referring to. Here you have these vents, and by now I'll surely have put up a screenshot somewhere in the video so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about. But you just have these vents that are inside the house, and they're typically lined up on the wall. Maybe you have a couple of them in a room, and they're just there. I mean, you don't see the wall vents or the ceiling vents like you see back home in Texas, at least. I don't know about other states, but in Texas, that's the standard. That's the norm. Now, the next thing that I have noticed about Dutch homes that I never really saw back home is the locks. The locks are different. Now, if I have one gripe with Dutch homes, this would be it. Basically, if you don't know what I'm talking about, with a lot of front doors here, in order to unlock the door, you have to use a key. Now, this is normal. Even back home in the US, you need to use a key. The difference is that in the US, you only need to use a key from the outside of the home. So if you're unlocking the door and you're outside of the door, you have to use your key. If you're inside, usually you'll have a little knob that you can simply flip and it'll unlock the door and you can exit the house. You close the door and then you lock it with your key. Here, you have to use a key from the outside and the inside. So, in other words, you have to have your key, you have to unlock the door from the inside with your key, and then you walk out of the door, you close it, you lock it the same way with the key. Now, not only do I find this to be a bit inconvenient, I actually feel like this is a very big safety hazard, a fire hazard in particular, because imagine if your house is on fire and you can't find your key. And imagine if the front door is the only way to get out, or maybe if your key is where the fire is. You're basically screwed. Your only other option then is to jump out of a window, which will probably be on the second story. And of course, that carries its own risks. So personally, I don't really understand why this is the case. If somebody knows more about that, if you know more about that, then please enlighten me in the comments, because I have to imagine that there's some kind of advantage to doing it this way, other than just it being cheaper to produce or anything like that. I have to imagine that there's some sort of practical feature that makes this better that I'm just not seeing.